doesn't know. All right, last thing I want to talk about with adolescent development is social development. So social development is, first of all, we're going to start with Erikson. Remember Erikson, we talked about childhood, right? What were the first 4 stages of Erikson's social development? First one was first year. Remember, they're always something versus something. Trust versus mistrust. Then we had autonomy versus shame and doubt. And then we had initiative versus guilt. And then we had industry versus inferiority. And so Erikson said those 4 are the ones that occur in childhood. Okay? Now, you'll all be happy to know that in adolescence, he identified basically one stage. What is the conflict that you are trying to achieve during adolescence? Puberty. That's a conflict that you have, but what are you trying to develop during adolescence? Identity. You're trying to develop who you are, okay? So this stage is identity versus role confusion. Developing who you are, and this is a process, okay? When you come out of childhood, you start to recognize that you are not the same person as your parents. You're starting to recognize that you have different opinions, you have different beliefs, okay? And they may not follow or may follow the same thing as your parents, and you're developing who you are as an individual person. He says in order to be successful in going on to this should be identity versus role confusion, sorry. Okay, so this is going on to the next stage, okay? This is between teens and 20s. By the time you are in your early 20s, you should know who you are. You should be comfortable with who you are, okay? And this is a process that teenagers go through, and it's huge for teenagers because especially, in high school, it's difficult to figure out who you are. Sometimes you're looked down upon if you are acting differently than other people. But if that's who you are, it's who you are, okay? I gotta remember what I did in here. There is another theorist that you should be aware of, a guy by the name of James Marcia. James Marcia focused on this identity crisis, and he says that identity involves crisis and commitment. And so a crisis is that basically when you're thinking about something, when you're contemplating roles, okay? He said that you go through this period where you're contemplating roles, and then eventually you'll hit this period where you have a commitment to something. So, for example, one of the areas that James Marcia, as well as Erikson, identified as something that you need to develop your own identity in is religion. Okay? So, not only, okay, what religion are you, but, what do you believe? Okay? James Marcia identified 4 categories of identity development. Okay? His 4 categories are based off from whether you actually if you actually went through the process of deciding and actively seeking out and thinking about things, or is it where you just made a commitment without thinking about everything? Okay? So, here's his 4 categories. Okay? So, the way this works is that he says that sometimes what will happen is that you'll start with a crisis, okay? You'll be thinking about things. So, for example, religion. Okay, let's say that you're thinking about religion. My best example of this is that when I was in junior high, I used to have a friend who went to the same church as me, and we got all the way up to confirmation. What it was? Confirmation. We got all the way up to confirmation. We'd done all of the religion classes at our school or our church together because we both went to public school. So we went to all these CCD classes and everything and learning about Catholicism, and we were getting ready to go into the confirmation class, and she looked at it and she started to realize, you know what? No. I don't believe any of this. She's like, there's a bunch of stuff that I have a hard time with the Catholic Church. She was in 8th grade when she decided this. She decided that she was not going to do this anymore. She's like, nope, I don't want to be Catholic anymore. Okay? She actually had this crisis, and what she did when she was in 8th grade, she actually went to all the different churches and different denominations within our town, and she went and visited them, and she actually examined the differences in religions. Okay? She looked to see, okay, what is it that what do I agree with? What do I not agree with? So she went through this process. She went through this crisis, and she eventually committed and chose a religion that fit for her. So in religious areas, she was identity achieved. Okay? Because she actually went through the process and thought about it. Okay? Now, there are other cases where there are people that don't give it any thought. They have no crisis at all, and they have no commitment. Okay? So these people are going to be those that really never thought about, they were never brought up with any particular religion. They never really thought about any religion. They don't have any commitment. Girls I used to babysit for, I told you about their parents. I still remember that we were walking one day, and one of the girls asked me, she's like, "What's this Mary?" I was like, "Mary? Who are you talking about?" It was out of the blue. I was like, "What are you talking about, Mary?" And she's just like, "Who's this Mary that people talk about?" And they're like, "Mary, something with God?" And I was like, "Oh," because they didn't go to church. They didn't talk about religion at all. Okay? They didn't talk about religion at all. So they had no crisis at all. She was asking me a question because she didn't know. She'd heard about it from some of her friends, and she's just like, "I have no idea." Okay? Identity diffused is where they go through no crisis and they have no commitment. To this day, they are no religion whatsoever, and they never examined any religion. Okay? That's identity diffused. They never really go through that process. Okay? Identity moratorium, okay? Moratorium is where you're actively seeking things out. You're going through that process. You're trying to figure things out. So you're in crisis, but you have no commitment as yet. Okay? You may have this right now for careers. Careers is another area that you can look at your identity. How many of you know what you want to be? How many of you are still thinking and considering, okay? You're concerned, those of you that are still thinking and considering, you're in identity moratorium. You're considering your options. You haven't decided yet. You're considering your options. Now, those of you that said you know what you want to be, okay? Is it a case of that you actually considered all the options, or is it a case of, you're going to be a doctor because everybody in my family are doctors? You are going to be, for example, my friend who decided that she was going to check out other religions. If she had just stayed with Catholicism, okay, because I'm Catholic, because my family is Catholic, that's identity foreclosure. Okay? Identity foreclosure is where you go through no crisis, but you have a commitment. So you never really considered your options, but you do have a decision. And your decision is basically based off on what other people tell you. Does that make sense? Okay? So these are kind of the four categories. And you can have different identity achievement, you can have different identities depending upon the area. So religion, you may be identity achieved. But for careers, maybe you're in moratorium. Maybe for relationships, maybe you're foreclosed. Okay, you have different areas that you maybe have different types of identities. Okay, you can have one overall. And then I also wanted to show you this. I think I mentioned this yesterday. This was, and I used to show it for a while, and then I decided that it's getting kind of dated, but I still love it. Like I said yesterday, I will post a link on Canvas if anybody actually wants to watch it. But it's called My So-Called Life. And the main character is the girl in the middle with the red hair. I don't know if you can see her, but that's Claire Danes. It was from '94, I think this was, so it was 20 years ago. But it was, the show was all about Claire Danes and her as a teenager and going through, she was basically going through this process of identity moratorium. She was trying to figure out who she was, okay? The very first episode, she goes and dyes her hair red. Her hair was kind of like a brown kind of color, it was kind of boring. She goes and dyes her hair red, and all of a sudden she starts hanging out with new people. And this girl in the kind of flower dress here, that used to be her best friend, okay? Now she's hanging out with this girl over on the other side of her that has the kind of the dyed hair on the sides, and this guy right here, okay? They're her new best friends, but they all have kind of different takes on their identity. Some of them know who they are, some of them don't. some of them are still confused, okay? But it shows all of these four, the reason I used to show it is it shows all of these, that there's individual characters that represent all four categories of identity development, okay? That's why I used to show it. So, oh yes, and Jared Leto is in it, if you like Jared Leto. He's Claire Danes' love interest, and she like pines after him, and he's one of those, I hate to say it, he's kind of like one of those guys, stereotypical guys that like doesn't have a clue what's going on. He's kind of like his own little world. No. He's got beautiful blue eyes. I'm trying to think what is going on recently. He's got a band too. I don't know. Look him up. Google him. You'd recognize him if you saw him. That's a bad picture because it's very small. Yeah. All right. Anybody have any questions about identity development right now? Okay. Will you pull up your that 15-6 handout for me, please? I'll give you scoring.